During the Revolutionary War, women played an important role supporting the fighting men. Women volunteered, often with their children, cooking and cleaning clothes in the camps for the soldiers, as well as nursing the sick and wounded. Some volunteered because they wanted to. Others, whose homes had been destroyed, had no other choice, as their husbands and fathers were off fighting in the Continental Army. As such, they had no other option but to follow the camps around and help. General Washington was not fond of this arrangement. However, he recognized the importance of their roles. There were strict rules kept in General Washington's camps, and the conduct was orderly. Their roles were invaluable, and as such they were paid a wage for their work, as well as rations, but not as much as the fighting men. Today, I want to tell you about a few women who went beyond those roles and helped to win the Revolutionary War. Molly Pitcher. While she may be one of the more well-known stories, historians debate over whether or not Molly Pitcher was her actual name. They believe this might have become a generic term for women who brought water to the soldiers. But what is agreed on is that there was a woman, Margaret Corbin, whose husband was posted to handle ammunition at Fort Washington, New York. British troops attacked that camp, and the man who operated the cannon was killed. Margaret's husband took his place firing the cannon, with Margaret taking up the ammunition duties. Then her husband was struck by enemy fire and also killed, and without hesitation, and because Margaret had watched her husband and learned how to work the cannon, she began to fire the cannon on the British Army until she too was hit by grape shot. It badly damaged her left arm and chest. For her bravery, wounds, and service, the Continental Congress awarded her half the pay of a soldier and a new set of clothes or its equivalent in cash. This made Margaret the first woman in the United States to receive a military pension. Permanently disabled and never fully able to recover from her battle wounds, Margaret was enrolled in the Corps of Invalids and was discharged from the Continental Army in 1783. She died in New York on January 16, 1800, at the age of 48. In 1926, the New York chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution petitioned to have her remains relocated to the cemetery at the United States Military Academy at West Point. She is the only Revolutionary veteran to receive that honor. Lydia Dara. Lydia and her husband William were married in 1753 and immigrated to the American colonies shortly after that. While they were Quakers and pacifists in name, they secretly sympathized with the revolutionary cause. But Lydia's home became a meeting place for British soldiers because of a cousin serving in the British Army. She would hide in a closet of an adjoining room where the soldiers would meet, and then smuggle word of their plans out to her son who was serving in the Continental Army by way of her younger son, often hiding coded messages in button covers or needlebooks. It is said she saved George Washington's army from British attack at White Marsh. While there are differing accounts of what she did, the story of her coming to warn of the British plans was recounted in the private journal of Elias Boudinot, Commissioner of Prisoners. She lived the rest of her life in Philadelphia and died December 28, 1789. Prudence Wright. Born in Massachusetts, Prudence grew up in a house with divided loyalties. While Prudence supported the Patriot cause, two of her brothers pledged their support to the Crown. She married David Wright, who was a staunch supporter of independence, in 1761, and the couple made a home in Pepperell, Massachusetts, where it is said not a Tory, a supporter of the Crown, resided. When the women heard of the Boston Tea Party, they burned their tea in front of the meeting house. David and Prudence became leaders of the revolutionary cause. David was one of the men who responded to the first shots of the war, but Prudence didn't just sit back and wait. Having overheard some plans by Samuel and Leonard Whiting to pass messages to the British, she rounded up women left at home and formed a female militia. They called themselves the Minute Women. The women disguised themselves as men, and armed with muskets, pitchforks, and any tools that could be used as weapons, they elected Prudence as their commander. They guarded Jewett's Bridge over the Nashua River between the towns of Pepperell and Groton, where anyone from the north would have to cross, and they patrolled the road. They waited all hours of the day and night in total silence, and finally, when two horsemen appeared, they came upon them in surprise. The men tried to flee, but the women had them surrounded. Captain Leonard Whiting, a known Tory, drew his revolver, but the other man, Samuel Cummings, Prudence's brother, made him lower it, saying, "I recognize Prue's voice, and she would wade through blood for the rebel cause." The men were then pulled from their horses and searched, where information from the British forces to the British general in Boston was found on them. The women took their prisoners to the house of Solomon Rogers and guarded them all night. The information they had obtained was sent to Charlestown, and the two men were given their freedom as long as they promised they would leave the colony. Prudence and her husband continued in their service in the Revolution and lived out their lives in Pepperell, where they raised 11 children. David lived to be 93 and Prudence to the age of 84. Her grave marker bears the inscription, "In memory of the Captain of the Bridge Guard, April 1775, Prudence Cummings, wife of David Wright." Sybil Livingston. Nicknamed the female Paul Revere, Sybil was not only much younger than Paul Revere at age 16, but she also purportedly rode farther than he did. Born in New York in 1761, she was the eldest daughter of Henry and Abigail Livingston. Henry Livingston was a farmer and gristmill owner who served in the military for over 60 years. He was loyal to the British Crown until 1773, when he switched sides and joined the Patriot cause. He was the colonel of his local regiment and had land between Connecticut and the coast of Long Island Sound, which made it a prime target for the British. On April 26, 1777, Colonel Livingston received news from a writer that the nearby town of Danbury was under attack by the British. Livingston's men had disbanded for planting season and were miles apart at their respective farms. The poor writer was so exhausted he could not continue on, and whether she volunteered or her father asked, Sybil rose to the occasion. She rode through the night some 40 miles on unfamiliar roads around Putnam County, spreading the word and rallying her father's men. She managed to avoid criminals and the British lookouts, and by the time she arrived back home, there were over 100 men there to assemble for the fight. Deborah Sampson. Deborah Sampson was born on December 17, 1760, in Plimpton, Massachusetts, near Plymouth, a descendant of Miles Standish and the great-granddaughter of Massachusetts Governor William Bradford. But her family struggled financially when her father never returned from a sea voyage. Her impoverished mother was forced to place her children in other homes, and at the age of 10, Deborah was bound out as an indentured servant to Deacon Benjamin Thomas. She completed her indenture at age 18. She was a self-educated teacher and weaver. An avid patriot, she was determined to join the cause in the Continental Army, and dressed as a man, bound her chest and enlisted in the 4th Massachusetts Regiment as Robert Shirtliff. She was a dedicated soldier, and her fellow soldiers would tease her about being unable to grow a beard. She was given the task of scouting neutral territory to assess the British buildup of men in Manhattan. In June of 1782, she and 2 sergeants led 30 infantrymen on an expedition that ended with a confrontation, often one-on-one with Tories. She led a raid on a Tory home that resulted in the capture of 15 men, and at the siege of Yorktown, she dug trenches, stormed a British redoubt, and took cannon fire. Her true identity was not discovered for more than 2 years, even though she received a gash in her forehead from a sword and was shot in her left thigh. She extracted the pistol ball herself in order to maintain her true identity. It wasn't until she became ill during an epidemic and lost consciousness that doctors discovered Robert wasn't a man. Deborah received an honorable discharge on October 23, 1783, and returned to Massachusetts. She married and had 3 children, but often would give lectures about her time in the Army. In 1792, she became the only woman to earn a full military pension for her service in the Revolutionary War. Most recently, she was named the official state heroine of Massachusetts, recognized on May 23rd every year. These are just a few of the women who showed remarkable bravery and courage in the face of danger. They made a name for themselves as heroes of the American Revolution. Their service is indicative of the service and sacrifice of so many women during that time. Not all of them donned a uniform and took on an army battle, but many of them took up the reins in the home as their husbands left for war, defending their homes and property and children from ransacking British soldiers intent on bringing harm. It is a time when women were called to be defenders, and they rose gallantly to the occasion. And they are how history happens. If you have enjoyed this episode of History Happens, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you can be sure to catch each new episode. Thanks for your support.